Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, and when you walk along the road, and when you lie down, and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. And then in the Newer Testament, Mark chapter 12. Beginning with verse 28. One of the teachers of the law came and heard them debating. Noticing that Jesus had given them a good answer, he asked him, "Of all the commandments, which is the most important?" "The most important one," answered Jesus, "is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. And the second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these." First things first. And one reason why I would like for us to hear Jesus' invitation to put first things first is because of what Carl said in his prayer. One little line where Carl said, "This world is tough." This world is tough. It is not the easiest thing to be a human being in this world. It can be hard to be a teenager. It can be a real challenge to be a university student. It can be quite a challenge to be rearing little children or to have children in adolescence. Or as some of you know, to have children who are now adults and you're trying to relate to all these adults in your family. And you work and you work and you work. Then occasionally you hear news like last night when Whitney Houston dies at the young age of 48 after just a life of just making some tragic choices. But see, tragic choices aren't about what celebrities make or Hollywood figures make. Tragic choices are sometimes what we make. So just for a moment, if we could just regroup here on Sunday morning, don't you dare leave the cares of the world outside. Bring every care of the world in here, because it's gathering together with all that we face and all that we deal with, where we get God's perspective on things. And so we regroup this morning hearing the invitation of Jesus to put first things first. When Jesus grew up, this might be helpful to flip over in your order of worship, flip over to the back side of that if you'd like. When Jesus grew up, he grew up in an observant Jewish home. Jesus would have grown up reciting what was typically referred to as the Shema, and that just simply means hear, that word. Comes right out of Deuteronomy 6, what we just read. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. The next line. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. We refer to it today as spiritual formation. But a big part of the spiritual formation for a family, for parents trying to rear their children right, is to teach them to recite the Shema every morning when they got up. And before they would go to bed at night, they would repeat that again. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, all your strength. And they would repeat that and repeat that and repeat that, believing that it was forming them into a different kind of people. It was a way of reminding all the family, first things first, love God. For the Israelites, there was nothing more important than loving God. In fact, the writer says they were to recite this at home. They were to recite this when they would go on a trip. They were to put this on the door frames. In fact, and some of you know this, they would take this scripture written on papyrus and put this place that in containers on their forehead and on their arms. Years later, Jesus would step into this tradition and amend this practice. And he would add to this one more line. Not just love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and strength, but love your neighbor as yourself. He's quoting Leviticus 19:18. Leviticus 19:18. He even says in Matthew 22 that all the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. Love God and love people. Love God and love others. That's what it means to be front and center again. Every now and then, you know what that's like. You'll be on a trip and your car starts to veer to the right, maybe veer off to the left. You're kind of holding the steering wheel and you're having to make the adjustment. You think, oh, this thing needs to be aligned. Sunday mornings are times when we're aligned again. And we remember what it means to put first things first. Loving God, loving people. The Jewish people said that there were 613 commandments. I like the way Jesus talks. Jesus says, you can boil it all down, and we're talking two. Love God and love others. Love God and love others. Now, let's talk for just a moment about what it means to do each one of these. I have never yet heard anybody object to either one of these two commands. Have you? We're all for this in theory. Love God and love others. That's exactly right. Front and center. What is challenging to us is putting this into practice. That's what's challenging. And I want to tell you that I don't know how to say this. One of the hardest things I deal with every week is grappling with the Bible and asking myself, do you put this into practice? I guess you do that, don't you? Don't you talk to yourself? Some of us answer ourselves. But to grapple with that, because being a teacher to a group of people is not just about teaching interesting Bible lessons with an occasional illustration thrown in. It is asking the hard truth about life and God and coming face to face with my own life as I hope you're coming face to face with your life. Because I'm going to tell you, there are people all over this planet who are in church buildings every Sunday morning whose lives are way out of alignment. Let's talk for a moment about what it means to first love God. Our primary relationship to God is love. And loving God is the ground of Christian faith and life. It's not based on compulsion or duty, but on the inward response of God's love for us. Our faith is not a matter of ritual or rule keeping. Are there rituals? Of course. Are there some rules? Of course. But the essence of who we are cannot be summed up with those words. Our faith is not a matter of just simply doing the right thing on the right day and somehow that satisfies God. Some people believe, or seem to believe, that as long as we are in church buildings, at a certain time, when I was growing up, it was called the next appointed time. But at a certain time, that somehow it all worked out. And the truth is, you can be dead as a human being, dead as a father, dead as a mother, dead as a husband, dead as a wife. You can be nothing but an empty shell of a human being and be in a pew every Sunday morning. In fact, they can prop you up in front of a class and you can teach or preach. Some people believe that as long as I can somehow hold out until the silver tray comes by and I can pinch off or drink it up or drink that somehow that inoculates me for another week. That we've kind of done that, and so that takes care of it, and we're free to go about our business. Some people believe that if we believe just the right doctrine, if I can just draw the right conclusions about the Bible, that God sees that I've made an A, and then that basically takes care of things. Well, again, you know this, but we take Scripture very, very seriously. But loving God is not just about what you know. Some people believe that as long as we're active and involved, I've told you this before, but I will never forget, it was on this side over here in another church building. I was about to preach one Sunday morning, and I looked up, and this guy I'd never seen this guy before. He's walking down the wall over here looking at a hymn book, psalm book. And I asked somebody, I said, "Who's that?" And he said, "Well, he's leading singing this morning." I said, "Really? I don't know him." He said, "Well, he didn't ever come." I said, "Well, who asked him to lead worship?" He said, "Well, the thinking was, if we could get him to take part, he would start coming more." Well, my goodness, I don't know how we quite connect those dots, but loving God is not just about getting somebody to show up more. Loving God is about loving Him with all my heart and soul and mind and strength. There was a story I heard years ago of a man, he and his wife were going on a long trip, and they had a lot of suitcases. And at one point, as they were at the airline counter checking their baggage, you can tell this is an old story because you wouldn't dare do all that today. But as they were checking their baggage, this guy turns to his wife and said, "You know, I just wish we could have brought our piano." And she said, we've got 22 bags here. What do you mean, bring the piano? And he said, yeah, because that's where our airline tickets are right now. First things first. It's fine to have all the luggage in place. But God says, what I want is I want you to love me. And then his son amends this later on and says, I want you to love people. I want you to love me with all your heart. With all your heart. The very center of your affections or what you treasure. Now, I have got I got 5 ones here. In ancient years, this used to be worth a great deal. Now, I'm not sure how much this is worth. And, you know, it's still worth a little bit. But I could bring this over here to some of my favorite people, and I could just lay it on this pew, and I could just walk away from it then and turn my back to it. And it's a 1, by the way. I'm really not all that worried. You know why I'm not worried? It has nothing to do with Ben. I'm really not all that worried because it's a $1 bill. I don't treat 20s that way. I certainly don't treat an occasional $50 or $100 bill that way. I treasure the 20 and the 50 and the 100. I'm not about to leave that in front of Forrest and these guys over here. You know, not even in a sermon. Now that $1 right there, y'all can split that, I guess. I don't know. But see, I don't treasure it that much. There are other things I treasure a lot more. Do you know when you love God with all your heart, you treasure God? You value God. He means something to you. This is not a part of my life, an aspect of my life, a dimension of my life. God is my life. And all that I am flows out of that one relationship that I need most. I want to love God not only with all my heart, but with my mind, my thinking. My relationship with God is not just some feeling I have that someday is here and someday is gone. It very much impacts my worldview and my thinking. I love God with all my, I love God with all my soul. The very essence of me. Where my will is. Where my desires are. I love God with all my strength. See, the bottom line here is God is calling us not just to have a church dimension of life or a faith dimension of life, but for my entire being to be given to Him. Does that make any sense? And then second, Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself. Turn to John 13, if you would. Last passage, John 13, verse 34. John 13, 34. The words of Jesus. A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. You love one another. Jesus was asked one time, who is my neighbor? Remember that story? There's the wonderful story of what we call the Good Samaritan. Jesus says if you're going to put first things first, number one, you love God. Second, you love people. And that begins with our homes. That begins with our marriages. That begins with the way we treat our children. That begins with the way we treat our moms and dads. That begins with the way we treat our friends. That begins with the way we treat people in our neighborhoods. Now, this is where I think, for a lot of us, this is where we lose any sense of witness today. Something is wrong when a person is known for knowing his Bible, while he's also known for his hot temper. Something's wrong when a person says he loves God, and this person is just flat mean to others at work. Something is wrong when this person is a long-time Christian, but instead of becoming more loving, he seems to, or she seems to become more self-centered. Something's wrong when a person says she follows Christ, but she's curt and abrupt with people in the congregation. Now, I want to tell you, and I just want to be very candid with you here. I think more than in any other area, this is where, as a church today, I don't just mean us as a congregation, but I mean just this is a sweep here, where the church today is losing its witness. The divorce rate among Christians is hardly any different than the divorce rate in the world. Do you know that? And the problem is not that the people are going to the courts. The problem is we're not loving our neighbor. Loving my neighbor is not theory for a married person. Loving my neighbor is about looking into the eyes of my wife or husband and treating them right. I heard this years ago, and I cannot get this. Here's a person who knows the content of the Word of God. Let me put it that way. Knows a whole lot of Bible. But is cantankerous and mean. And so what we say is, well, he's just human. She's just human. Jesus has made very, very clear what's front and center. What's front and center is loving God and how we treat one another. Charlotte and I were talking about this the other day, or yesterday. Turn to Ephesians 5. She reminded me of this one. Ephesians chapter 5. Verse 25. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present to her himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated his own body, but he feeds and cares for it just as Christ does the church. 3 times he says this. Verse 25, husbands, love your wives. He is not commanding a feeling. A friend of mine was talking to a guy one day. He says, you know, I just don't love her anymore. Just don't love her anymore. My friend said, you really ought to go home and love her. He said, I just don't love her anymore. I don't love her. My friend said, you really ought to go home and love her. The other guy said, you're not listening. I don't love her anymore. My friend said, if you are a follower of Jesus, this is a commandment. Jesus is not commanding a feeling. He is commanding a certain kind of behavior. I am telling you, in a culture where so many families are destroyed, broken, dysfunctional, I could go on with war, there is a powerful witness that awaits us if we take this seriously. He's not calling for perfect marriages. He's calling for men and women who will love one another with the love of Christ. And the good news is, He enables us through His grace and the indwelling Holy Spirit to have the power to do that kind of loving. It is a shame when a guy is known for treating his wife like a bully, or when a woman talks about her husband with such disrespect, or children are at their parents' throat and parents are at their children's throat and back and forth. Listen, we are called to be a different kind of people, and where that begins is with following Jesus. And if you follow Jesus, you're called, one, to love God and to do the loving thing for one another. Is marriage hard? Absolutely. Ask my wife. It's real hard. But I'm telling you, we don't. I really believe people in Waco would find it so refreshing to see marriages and families and coworkers where you can just count on them treating people right. What do you think? I mean, am I just way off on this one? Where you're an employer and you hire someone who follows Christ, and you can have confidence that not only will this person work hard, but this person will have a disposition that reflects Christ. How about that? Well, this may sound, I don't know, does this sound easy or not? I think it sounds challenging, but I'm telling you, I think it is radical enough to make such a difference. I think, at least for us, at times marriage has been really tough. Man, I just remember we first got married, and I mean, it just seemed like one day I was standing up in front of a bunch of people and I said, I do. And then that was kind of it, and off we went. And we would just get in little arguments about the most ridiculous things. That's not the way I want it. Well, that's the way I've always done it. Well, that's not the way I want it. Just back and forth, y'all never did that, but some of us did, I guess. Or sometimes they're bigger things. I never learned how selfish I was until I got married. And then I never learned how selfish I was till we had children. I mean, here you go. Here it is. It just, and I wish I could say that I always just thought really good thoughts when I was handing over all that money. Sometimes I just think, man, I work and work and work, and off we go. Just good night. And this is the point I'm making. Do you know that marriage and family can be a place where Christ shapes you into a person that loves his Father and learns to love others? It is actually a discipline. Well, there was a book written several years ago called A Practical Guide to Prayer by Dorothy Haskins. She tells about this famous violinist who one day told the secret of how she mastered the violin. This is what she said. She said, "I did it through planned neglect." She said, "There were many things that used to demand my time. When I went to my room after breakfast, I made my bed, straightened the room, dusted, and did whatever seemed necessary." She said, "Then when I finished my work, I turned to my violin practice. Well, that system prevented me from accomplishing what I should have accomplished on my violin. So I reversed things. I deliberately planned to neglect everything else until my practice period was complete. And that program of planned neglect is the secret of my success. First things first." Okay, so last week we gather here, and what happened last week? Do you remember? All of our children came up here and they brought all of these sacks and boxes of, was it peanut butter and jelly and pinto beans? There were massive containers of pinto beans, probably big jars of peanut butter. I didn't check each one, I don't know. But there was a lot of it. I'm told by the folks that hand this out every week that we now have at least 2 to 3 months supply. Wow, I was so impressed with all of you who gave. Do you know that is an action of loving other people? Well, what we do is we look for these opportunities to love people, to love others. The second greatest commandment, Jesus said. But the place where we start is at home. It's in the way we talk to one another. It's in the way we deal with our mother and dad. It's the way we deal with our kids. It's the kind of mother-in-law you are, the kind of father-in-law you are. It's going to work and making the decision you're not going to be a royal pain to deal with. That you are going to be a godly woman, a godly man. So, what we're talking about today is not just something for us individually, but as a church, how we step into our community, and put first things first. And Jesus says, you love God, and you love people, and you know that the law and the prophets hang on these realities. We're going to sing in just a moment. I want to encourage you this week, if you know that you've had a conversation with somebody that was just wrong and ungodly, I want to encourage you not to sing, but just to bow your head and pray to God for a new beginning, even as He forgives you of this past week. Now, if that person is in this room, I really want to encourage you to go to that person and make that right. Say, you know, I was pretty short, pretty curt, pretty abrupt, whatever it is. I was out of line. It's not about that other person. It's about you and God. We're going to go to work, a lot of us, tomorrow morning. Some of you I know work nights, and some of us work odd hours. Let us have a week where first things become first. If you want to pray with our elders about this, some of them will be at the back, one or two will be at the front. If you're ready to be baptized for the forgiveness of all sins, ready to put first things first and follow Jesus. And remember, following Jesus is about loving God and loving people. Well, I want to encourage you to do that. Let's stand, let's sing.